Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dad and Cole Football Patrol. I am your co-host Dad.
And I am your co-host Cole.
That's right, guys. So this is episode number 3, Cole. So it's hard to believe we're on our 3rd episode. A few quick housekeeping notes for everyone out there. So we are in the process of getting a new microphone back in the mix, so please bear with us. If the recording audio is a little bit off this episode, hang in there. We promise to have better audio on our next episode. And then also right now, we're in off-season mode along with the NFL. So while they're going through free agency period and the upcoming draft, we want to put a little bit of content out there. But once training camps start in late July, early August, we'll pick back up more in the frequency of content. But for now, we have so much to talk about, Cole, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
So let's dig into our free agency period recap. It has been nuts. So when we last spoke to you guys, the Alex Smith trade had occurred. So we don't need to get into that too much. But there's been a frenzy of big quarterback news out there. So first and foremost, let's talk about some of those moves. Kirk Cousins going to Minnesota. Cole, how do you feel about that? What does that do for Minnesota? The departure out of Washington for Cousins. Your thoughts?
I think that will make an improve to their team because Case Keenum is now going to the Denver Broncos, and he's not wearing number 7 anymore because of John Elway.
That's right.
He's wearing number 4. So, I don't know what will happen with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I think for me, and you know what, let's bring in the other quarterback moves that happened and we can talk about them in comparison. So along with Cousins to Minnesota, you got Sam Bradford on a 1-year deal to Arizona. You already mentioned Case Keenum is going out to Denver. So let's focus on those 3 real quick. We're going to talk about another quarterback trade that happened, just as far as the free agencies. So out of those 3 moves, you got Cousins to Minnesota, Keenum to Denver, and then Bradford to Arizona. Which of those 3 teams do you feel made the most improvement by signing that new quarterback to their team? Which is now a much better team than they were prior to that?
I would have to say, like, the Broncos, they have Von Miller, the defense, they have, like, Thomas, and I think they might have a chance to going back to the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. I think the biggest jump, the biggest margin of improvement was for the Denver Broncos. When you look at guys like Paxton Lynch and Brock Osweiler, when you go from there to Keenum. Now, again, I'm not sold on Keenum. I think the true Case Keenum kind of reared his ugly head playing against our beloved Eagles when he threw that critical pick 6, which really, it turned the entire game. However, Keenum had a solid year, and I don't want to define his entire year by that one play, even though it wasn't the most critical game in the year. But I still think Denver makes the biggest jump up. Because to me, the quarterback play was pretty solid for Minnesota. So when you add Cousins into that, yes, it's an improvement. But is it as a big a jump as what Denver is getting? I'm not really so quite sure. So in other free agency moves, one of the biggest players to date, and they also have the most strength in the upcoming draft, has been the Cleveland Browns. Now, Cleveland has kind of been the laughing stock of the league a little bit, but just on paper, from what they've been doing, I'm not so sure they're such a laughable team anymore. So, Cole, I'm going to turn this over to you. What's been going on with the Browns, and what have been your thoughts on the moves they've been making?
So, here has been an oddly trade. Jarvis Landry from the Miami Dolphins going to the Browns. And also Tyrod Taylor's going there. So, the quarterback for the Bills now is A.J.
McCarron, yeah.
And A.J. McCarron's a bad quarterback. He got signed from the Bengals, and he was a backup quarterback for Andy Dalton.
Yeah, so there's 2 things at play here that you're bringing up, so we can talk about both at the same time, the Browns piece and the Bills piece. So let's talk about the Bills real quick, and again, we'll touch on both these organizations. With Tyrod Taylor departing and the Bills signing McCarron, I almost feel like they're setting themselves up to be aggressive in the draft, to potentially move up, to try and land their future long-term quarterback, with McCarron just being almost like a one-year stopgap, just a guy who's got a little bit of a pedigree and some experience as a younger guy who can maybe start a few games, but eventually is going to be a bridge to their rookie. So I kind of feel that's what the Bills are doing. Now for the Browns, you touched on some of their moves. I'm a big Tyrod Taylor guy. Admittedly, I've had him in fantasy football in some capacity for a few years now, and he's been stellar in that regards. But I think he brings some athleticism, some throws down the field. You talk about Josh Gordon, who's already there as a wide receiver. Yeah, and you're gonna add Jarvis Landry, who's just an incredible route runner, stick mover, another explosive guy. And then also, I believe that they signed Carlos Hyde this offseason too, right? Who brings some legitimacy. I know they lost Isaiah Crowell, but if Hyde's going to be your every down guy, and then you go ahead and you add Duke Johnson as a receiving back, I mean, you're almost talking about a pretty formidable offense now. So based on these moves, though, you got 2 out of the first 4 picks in the upcoming NFL draft. Where do you see them going now to complement what they've done in the offseason so far?
So I would take a quarterback in the draft.
Yeah, I think there still needs to be a long-term consideration at quarterback as well. I wonder if they feel that, or if they're really going to go all in and kind of double down on Taylor. But what about Barkley? You signed Carlos Hyde, but does that prevent you from considering drafting Saquon Barkley at all?
No, I would get him still.
You would still do that, right? Hyde's got a few years under his belt.
Actually, I wouldn't. I would get Sam Darnold. Then the Giants could take Barkley.
Well, there's some thoughts that Barkley could fall to the Giants for sure. And we're going to touch on the draft a little bit more. But let's stick in the realm of free agency. So let's talk about some of these other moves. And guys, please pardon me for reading. There's been so much activity in the league this offseason in this condensed free agency frenzy period. There's no way I could keep track of all this in my head. So I'm just going to rattle off some information to you, and you give me your thoughts. And Ndamukong Suh just recently over to the Rams, and you're pairing him already with a pretty formidable defensive line, including the defensive lineman or defensive player of the year in Aaron Donald. What does that do to an already stout Rams defense?
So they have like a good defense.
So there was a handful of veteran running backs that have changed teams over the past month or so. I'm going to rattle these down to you, Cole, and maybe you just let me know the one move out of these handful of moves that you feel could be the biggest benefit and uptick in improvement for the team. So just let me list them real quick. We got LeGarrette Blount to the Detroit Lions, Isaiah Crowell to the Jets, Jonathan Stewart to the Giants, Dion Lewis to the Titans, Frank Gore to Miami, and Doug Martin out to Oakland to the Raiders. Out of all those I just listed, which gave you the biggest reaction?
I think LeGarrette Blount to
the Lions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of agree that he can potentially make a massive impact to Detroit. With Blount, for the past 2 years, whatever team he was on, the team decided to depart to him after he made a pretty significant contribution, and that includes this past current year with our beloved Eagles. Blount was a major factor on that team, especially in the Super Bowl itself, but he goes to Detroit with 2 kind of more speedier pass-catching type of guys in Amir Abdullah and Theo Riddick, and I think Blount can add some instant identity to that team. He's a hard-nosed guy. He's a hard-nosed football player. I think Detroit kind of lacks identity a little bit. We don't really quite know what they are. I know they got some good skill guys there. I think Matthew Stafford can chuck it as good as anybody in the league. But what really is the identity of that offense when you think about it? I'm not indicating they're going to become a smash-mouth powerhouse football team, but I think Blount does give some identity to that offense. Now let's talk about Doug Martin and now Jordy Nelson both going to Oakland. John Gruden's first year as a coach. First of all, what do you think is Gruden as the coach? And do you find it interesting at all that he's going out and acquiring some veteran offensive talent for that team?
So maybe like Jordy Nelson and Doug Martin could like tell him a little bit about football, because John Gruden hasn't been a coach since 2008.
Wow, is that the last time he was a coach? He's been announcing that entire time? That's crazy. That's longer than what I thought. Yeah, so while he's been announcing, to your point, he hasn't been down in the trenches calling plays or managing a team or anything. So you think he might have a little rust to shake off, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you think it's possible that the game of NFL can kind of pass by a coach and kind of move on beyond where they're at if they're not involved in the daily operations every day? Or do you think by him announcing like he was and constantly breaking down film, he was able to keep up with all the new trends and the new goings on of the league? You think he might have some issues?
Derek Carr and Marshawn Lynch, who's like really good, Marshawn Lynch. Derek Carr could maybe teach him, since he's been in the league. He started his career in 2014. I think.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Cole. So I'd love to see John Gruden learning some lessons from his guys. All right, so let me run down some other moves that took place. Michael Crabtree, we were just talking about the Raiders. He departs from Oakland and goes to Baltimore. Baltimore has been desperate for some presence at wide receiver. Mike Wallace, who was there, he just joined our Eagles. Mike Wallace was an okay player for Baltimore. I don't know if he made quite the impact they were looking for. Baltimore took a flyer on Jeremy Maclin last year when he was healthy, impactful, but the guy just can't stay healthy, and I love Maclin, but you got to be on the field. What do you think about Michael Crabtree to Baltimore? Can he bring some stability and some playmaking to wide receiver for the Ravens offense?
So he played the Ravens in the Super Bowl because he was at the Niners.
Oh, that's right. I hadn't even thought about that. Good point.
So I think he got a penalty last season for
he got involved in that nasty fight, right?
Yeah.
I think there was some chain snatching and some helmet grabbing going on, right?
Yeah.
That is a rough one. So you're bringing up an interesting point. Kind of the quality of guy, the character has been a little bit questioned about Crabtree, a little diva-ish maybe, but there's been no doubt the production on the field for Oakland has been there. I think you can even safely argue last year he outproduced Amari Cooper, the more considered top flight receiver, but I guess it remains to be seen how he's going to fit in with Baltimore.
I think he'll be good because he was a good target for Derek Carr. And now that means he should be a good target for Joe Flacco. I mean, the Ravens have the defense. They have a good offense. So that's really...
So, yeah, he could potentially be the missing piece to get them back into the playoffs. I think that's a great point. So, all right, some of the other moves, I know you were very excited about this move. You got Jimmy Graham departing Seattle and heading to Green Bay. Now, let me set up the question this way. If you're Aaron Rodgers and one day you have Jordy Nelson and he leaves, but in comes Jimmy Graham, if you're Aaron Rodgers, do you feel your team is worse off, just the same, or better with the trade-off of Nelson leaving, Jordy Nelson leaving, and Graham coming in?
I think that makes us better because Jimmy Graham, that he could shake people off to give him the quarterback a more open target, and he's a big guy. He can block and get for pass catching too.
No, he's a big dude, no doubt about it. He's a physical, dominant guy. I'll be very curious to see how he fits in with Rodgers there and just what that team can do. I mean, look, no matter who you put on a field with Aaron Rodgers, he's going to make those guys better. It'll be interesting to see if those guys can become a dominant 1-2 punch. I think Rodgers has kind of lacked that a little bit, having that go-to guy. I mean, Nelson was it, but he just couldn't stay on the field all the time. Randall Cobb kind of fizzled. He came on near the end of the year last year. There just hasn't been that real safety blanket guy for Rodgers, I feel at least. It'll be curious to see if Graham can become that guy. All right, so 2 more moves to discuss, and we're clearly not covering all the moves in the NFL this offseason. I mean, that could fill up hours on end. But But let's talk about a wide receiver that I know is near and dear to both our hearts because of fantasy football connections you and I both had with this individual, and that is Sammy Watkins going from the Rams over to the Kansas City Chiefs. What kind of impact do you think that brings to the Chiefs? And what kind of impact do you think that causes to the Rams with his departure from that offense?
So now they have Patrick Mahomes because Alex Smith got traded to the Redskins. So but they have Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill. So what is Tyreek Hill gonna stay on the field or is he gonna be off the field?
Yeah, to your point, I think it's almost like for defenses, pick your poison. I think he'll definitely stay on the field. I think you're going to have two burners down the sidelines in Watkins and Hill, and I think that's going to create up so much space for Travis Kelce to work the middle of the field. I think there's just going to be so much spacing on that field, and then you're going to also have Kareem Hunt, who's just a dynamic player, out in the flat and working the hash marks in the receiving game. So I think for Mahomes, he's going to have just a handful of weapons that are dynamic at his disposal. So I think for the Chiefs, it's a massive win. Now, look, some people can say that Watkins disappointed for the Rams last year. For me personally, think this year could have been a significant step up. If I'm not mistaken, he joined that team right at the beginning of the year or late in training camp, maybe right at the onset of the year. I forget when he joined up with the Rams, but I don't believe he spent the offseason with them. So I would have been interested to see him back on that team. I think potentially, even though he might not have had the gaudy numbers and the stats, that whenever there's a guy like Sammy Watkins on the field, he's going to command attention from the defense. He's going to command that you pay attention and scheme for him as defense. And I think a guy like Robert Woods had the year that he had because of Sammy Watkins. I think some of the running lanes and the running availability for Todd Gurley could be accounted for with the attention that Watkins is commanding on the field from the defensive end. So I don't know. I'll be curious about that. Maybe they won't miss a step, but I think potentially they could miss his presence a little bit on their offense.
Because Tyreek Hill's a little guy. He's speedy. He is 5'10". That's his height, I think. And then Sammy Watkins is a bigger guy. Then he could shake off tackles.
Yeah, I agree. I just think Kansas City definitely improved themselves. Now the trick is going to be, is Mahomes equipped and ready to step up as an everyday starter to get these guys the ball? But man, he definitely has the skill set around him to help ease him into that role. So the final free agency move we're going to talk about is Richard Sherman. And man, Seattle Seahawks, what's going on with those guys? It feels like guys are departing left and right. Our beloved Eagles picked up Michael Bennett in a trade. You don't need to get too deep down into that. I thought that was a great move for the Birds. But for Sherman, again, a real just mainstay, vocal presence, leader, playmaker for the Seattle Seahawks, goes over to the San Francisco 49ers that are a team that are on the come up here, and I feel like are building something with Garoppolo at the helm. How do you feel, Cole, that Richard Sherman's departure, A, will affect Seattle, and now his presence in San Francisco will contribute to their end?
He's good. He has speed. He could he's a cornerback. He could chase down people. And I think we'll have a good year with San Fran, and that'll help them get more points on the board.
Yeah, I think he's going to inject a little bit of a confidence and a swagger and a winning attitude that he can bring from Seattle to San Francisco, a culture that's been kind of affected by losing and just a lot of really not great stability there. And he can bring some credibility to a young team that's on the come up. So I think that's an interesting addition for San Francisco and for Kyle Shanahan there. And I'll be curious to see how that plays out.
Now we're going to move on to the NFL draft.
That's right, buddy. So let's run down the draft order here, and we'll just tick off the top 6 or so picks. So we got pick number 1, Cleveland Browns. Then we got the Giants, the Jets,
the Browns, the Broncos, the Colts, and
The Buccaneers. Yeah, I shortened it up by Bucks. That might be a little confusing. So pick number 7 is the Bucks. So, Cole, a lot of teams here with some pretty bad records.
Yeah.
But already a lot of these teams have had some interesting off seasons. And I think a lot of these teams on paper improve themselves already. So let's just talk about the Browns. We talked about the free agency moves. You're the general manager of the Cleveland Browns. You're on the clock right now, Cole. What are you doing with that number 1 pick?
Picking Sam Darnold.
Taking Sam Darnold. You want to solidify your quarterback position for the long haul. You're tired of the quarterback carousel. Now, does he come onto your team and compete to start day 1? Or do you take the pressure off the young man and say, Tyrod Taylor is my guy for this year?
I mean, he's a good quarterback. He's playing the whole season.
Taylor, that is.
No.
Oh, so you're bringing in Darnold to compete and try and start from day 1.
He's a good young quarterback.
Okay, I love it. I love the aggressiveness on your end. Now, for the Giants, they made a big free agency signing with an offensive tackle, I believe, from New England.
Yep.
They signed Jonathan Stewart, the running back. Are you sticking with Eli and adding a piece to build the Eli in that offense to try and extend the Eli Manning era? Or are you grabbing your next guy at quarterback and moving forward and turning the page?
I'm getting Saquon Barkley.
You're going Barkley then. You're doubling down on the Eli Manning era. You're going to add that franchise running back to Eli, and you're looking to win another Super Bowl right away. That's your move? I respect that, and I'm sure Eli appreciates that as well. What's up, Eli? All right, so now let's turn to the New York Football Jets. They're next on the clock. They've already give some messaging this year. They're going to stick with McCown at quarterback, but I don't think anyone has fooled themselves into thinking he's the long-term solution. You're on the clock right now for the New York Football Jets. You're the general manager, Cole. What's your move?
Quarterback, and I'm going with Josh Allen.
All right, that's your move. I respect that, man. So now we're going to go to the Browns with their second of 4 picks out of the first 4 picks in the draft overall. You're wearing that general manager's cap again. You're back on the clock. You got your quarterback of the future. Now what are you looking to do with your second pick in the top 4?
Bradley Chubb, defensive end.
Oh, you want to solidify that defensive presence, have him pair up with that young rookie you drafted last year, Myles Garrett, have the stud bookend defensive ends. I like your approach there. It's a passing league, so on defense, to be able to harass and attack and put pressure on the quarterback is the name of the game. I like where you're going there. And then we'll just round it up. As far as the Broncos, the Colts, and the Bucks, just in general, what kind of needs do you think these guys have? I know, like, for instance, the Broncos, they signed Case Keenum that we talked about. Do you still feel they're in the market for a quarterback, or were they looking to improve their offensive line, which has been dreadful? What do you think the Broncos need?
I'm giving them a good target for a wide receiver.
Interesting.
Christian Kirk.
Oh, you want to go Christian Kirk to get some more skill guys in the mix for the newly acquired quarterback. I like that. Look, you can never score enough points in this league. As I said, it's a passing league, so you want to get some assets around the newly acquired Keenum. I respect that. And then with the Colts got Andrew Luck. Hopefully he's going to be back and be healthy. New head coach Frank Wright. What do the Colts need to add to their mix with this top-end pick to try and improve their chances of getting back into the playoffs?
I'm going to get them a QB.
Oh, you want to go with a QB? Even though you have your franchise guy right there, are you a little bit concerned about his health and ability to stay on the field? What are your thoughts behind this process with having Luck there, still going to take a quarterback?
I would get like a really good one, and that like he needs like it's a 70-yarder, a 60-yarder guy. I'm going with the Lamar Jackson.
Oh, I love Lamar Jackson. He is an interesting talent. Wow. All right. Very controversial pick out of you, Cole, but I think that's an interesting move, and I think there'll be some debate online about this, but I love your aggressiveness and your plan and how you attack the NFL draft, so good on you. All right, so last of our top picks, we got the Bucks at pick number 7. Once again, you got the GM, the general managership cap on. What are you doing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
I'm getting them a QB because, look, Jameis Winston, not that good, so I'm going to get Baker Mayfield.
Oh, another controversial pick out of you. Baker Mayfield, kind of a wild card guy, but there's no doubt about it. He is a fascinating, compelling player on the field as well as off. So you have some concerns about Winston for the long haul for that team. That's another controversial pick out of you, Cole. I love it. So that's a wrap on our draft talk for the top few picks. Now listen, we're unapologetic Eagles fans here, both Cole and I, so I wouldn't want to have a podcast episode without giving a little extra attention to our beloved Birds. So Cole, what do you think is the most #1 biggest pressing need for the Philadelphia Eagles heading into this upcoming draft?
Which one do you think will be it?
Oh, so you got Carson and Nick there. So you think the biggest pressing question hanging over this offseason, and there's no doubt it's been just a raging debate on Sports Talk, is Nick Foles, Carson Wentz. I don't think there's any argument who the franchise long-term guy is. I think it's more a discussion about, will Carson be available day one? What do you do if you get a trade offered to you about Nick Foles? Do you accept that? I've been on record all along stating if it is a second-round pick or higher, you have to take the asset, you have to take the pick and move on from Foles. This is without a doubt Carson Wentz's team. And even if that means you sign some journeymen to start 3 games in September, I feel September is the new preseason for the NFL anymore. I think you could have anybody come in here and go 2-1 with this team and then turn the team back over to Carson. What are your thoughts? What are you thinking when you think about week 1? Is Carson going to be there potentially? Will it be Foles? What are your thoughts?
I think Carson will stay because I think we'll be healthy enough.
Okay, so you think he's going to be there week 1, reading some of the tea leaves. He's saying he's going to be there without a doubt. Peterson being a little bit cautious and tepid, as he should as a coach. But it's going to be fascinating to keep track on that. So, guys, thank you so much for checking out episode number 3 of the Dad and Cole Football Patrol. We love football. We are both obsessed with it here in this household, and we love talking about it for you. Stay tuned. Thanks for checking out the episode.